China's plan to dominate the world economy is falling apart. To hit America where it hurts, in early October, China restricted exports of rare earth materials. These materials are needed for all sorts of electronics, from phones, cars to fighter jets. They wanted to show the world, you need us. Instead, it backfired. They reminded everyone exactly why you can't rely on China. Because this isn't new. China has been weaponizing trade for years. As a result, in the first half of 2025, China saw its worst foreign investment numbers ever. $46.6 billion more left the country than came in. Companies are pulling out. So where's the money going? Safer options like its fellow communist neighbor Vietnam, who in the same period attracted $18 billion, its highest ever. The factories that would have gone to China are now going there. The likes of Samsung, Apple, and Intel are all building there. HP said they're moving production out of China. Microsoft's aiming to do the same by 2027. In total, nearly half of American companies operating in China have already moved their money out, and more will follow. This is hitting China exactly where they can't afford it, their massively struggling economy. Youth unemployment in the country is at record highs. Property prices have been falling for 3 years straight, and now the foreign investment that fueled China's rise for the past 4 decades is drying up. China needs these companies to stay, not just for the jobs. Their entire growth model depends on being the world's factory and selling stuff to everyone else. And now, using rare earths restrictions to play a political game might backfire in the long run. Because here's the thing about rare earths. Despite their name, they are not actually that rare. They are found all over the world. The US, Australia, even Afghanistan. China doesn't have a monopoly on the deposits. What they do control is the processing, the expensive, polluting work of refining raw minerals into usable materials. For decades, everyone was happy to let China handle the mess. But the moment China weaponized it, countries realized we can just build our own processing or find our own deposits. And that's exactly what's happening. India, for one, doesn't want to be held hostage by China anymore. So they're talking to the Taliban. Yes, the Taliban, about mining rare earths in Afghanistan. Think about that for a second. India would rather go with the Taliban than depend on China for critical materials. And then there's the G7, which are these countries. They're coordinating on a strategy to build rare earth stockpiles together, funding mines in Australia and Canada, all to find a way to exclude China from this new rare earth supply chain. These countries can barely agree on anything, but China just gave them a reason to unite. Now here's what makes this interesting. Beijing's seen this movie before. They've used trade as a weapon many times. Japan, South Korea, and Australia, just to name a few. I'll touch on those examples in a bit. And look, let's be clear here. America's doing the same thing with Trump's tariffs. The US has restrictions on 3,000 items. China, only 900. The US has also blacklisted over 1,100 Chinese companies. China has only done so for 82 American ones. Both sides weaponize trade, and trade wars hurt everyone. They make everything more expensive, force countries to pick sides, and most of all, hurt the regular people. But here's China's specific problem. Every time they pull this move, the target doesn't just surrender and give in to whatever China wants. They find alternatives, and they never come back. Let me show you what I mean. September 7th, 2010, a Chinese fishing boat rams Japanese Coast Guard vessels near some disputed islands in the East China Sea. Japan detained the captain in the incident. China's move secretly restrict rare earth shipments to Japan. Now, at the time, China controlled 97% of global rare earth production. This was supposed to be checkmate. And for about 6 months, Japan panicked. But then something changed. Japan forced themselves to figure out how to never depend on China again. They threw $1.2 billion at the problem. $250 million went to an Australian mining company called Lynas. They locked in supply contracts with them. And get this, They extended those contracts in 2019 all the way to 2038. The Japanese also started developing technology to recycle old electronics and pull rare earths out of them. They even discovered massive deposits underwater and started researching on how to mine the ocean floor. By 2012, Japan had cut China's share of rare earth imports from 82% down to 49%. China's supposed checkmate forced Japan to learn exactly how to escape it. Next, in 2016, South Korea decides to deploy a US missile defense system called THAAD. China was furious. They banned Chinese tour groups from visiting South Korea. Overnight, Korean tourism dropped 48%. Yeah, Chinese people love Korea. They forced 74 Lotte stores in China, which is a major Korean retailer, to close over fake fire code violations. More stores closed due to anti-Korea boycotts. In total, 93 stores were sold off. Lotte lost over $700 million. China even banned Korean TV shows and K-pop from Chinese streaming platforms. This was supposed to make South Korea bend the knee. And yeah, it worked for a moment. South Korea gave in, signing what became known as a 3 no's in October 2017, promising to limit missile deployment. But South Korea realized they didn't like being bullied. Public opinion of China shifted hard. In 2015, 63% of South Koreans had favorable or neutral views of China. Now, only 19% view China favorably. So South Korea deepened military cooperation with the US and Japan. In August 2023, the leaders met at Camp David to sign a security cooperation agreement. By 2024, they launched their first trilateral military exercise. These fighter jets, warships, coordinated drills, the kind of military integration that would have been unthinkable before the THAAD incident. And here's the kicker. One thing South Korea had promised in those 3 no's was no military alliance. But what's happening here looks an awful lot like one, just without the former name. China may have gained a face-saving statement in 2017, but they lost a neighbor's trust permanently. Then, in April 2020, Australia calls for an independent investigation into COVID's origins. And surprise, surprise, China took that as an insult. So Beijing launched a trade war with Australia. Wine tariffs up to 218%, barley tariffs of 80%, bans on Australian beef, coal, timber, lobster. This was supposed to cripple Australia's economy. But here's what actually happened. Australia simply found new markets. Their wine went to the UK and the US instead. Their coal went to India and Japan. And they doubled down on the US alliance, joining the security partnership AUKUS with America and Britain in September 2021. It's a military pact that's going to give Australia nuclear submarines designed specifically to counter China. Funnily enough, in 2023, China began quietly lifting those trade restrictions against Australia. Barley tariffs lifted in August 2023, wine tariffs in March 2024, lobster ban lifted in October 2024. Because it turns out they were hurting Chinese industries more than Australian ones. Australian barley goes into Chinese beer. Australian coal powers Chinese steel mills. The dependence went both ways. China may have won the initial fight in all of these examples, but they lost the war. Do you see the pattern here? Every single time China tries to bully others, their target may panic briefly, but they find alternatives and they remember the pain forever. And then you wonder why they all get closer with America. You think that Beijing would learn, but it seems they fundamentally can't. That brings us to the real question. Why? Why does China keep doing this when it keeps backfiring? Here's the thing, it's not like China's coercion tactics doesn't work at all. In the short term, it works pretty well. The rare earth controls did spike global prices. Trump threatened 100% tariffs on China on the 10th of October, but just a week later, he backed down, saying that it's not sustainable. So Beijing got what it wanted in a moment, but that's exactly the problem. They're winning these small battles, but they might be losing the war, because they're teaching the world something much more important. You can't trust China. And once that lesson sinks in, it doesn't matter if you back down today. Countries are already spending billions to make sure they never have to depend on China again. So why does Beijing keep doing this? The answer isn't in their foreign policy, it's at home. China's economy is struggling. On paper, GDP grew 5.2% in the first half of 2025. That looks decent, right? But here's the problem. The numbers inflated by deflation and comparing against weak growth from 2024. The real situation on the ground is much worse. The official youth unemployment hit 18.9% in August. Experts are saying that the real number is probably closer to 30+%. The property market's crashing. Home prices are generally down 15 to 20% from the peak. People are hoarding cash because they are scared about the future. These are deep structural problems that can take years to fix. And many of those solutions require giving up party control of the society and economy, like shifting wealth from state-owned corporations to regular citizens, letting markets work instead of party committees deciding everything. But all of that requires giving up control. The entire worldview of Xi Jinping and his inner circle, like many other authoritarians in history, is built around this important idea. Control equals survival. He genuinely believes the West wants to contain China, that only strength ensures security, that the freer market economy equals more uncontrollable chaos, while party control equals stability. For Xi Jinping, control isn't just a means to an end, it is the end. So when domestic problems like a struggling economy are an issue, it's a good idea for him to amplify external threats and project strength outwards. Now look, the rivalry with the West is real. They see China as a competitor and build alliances against them. But Beijing takes these real tensions and uses them as a political tool to distract people by focusing on these external enemies. And when you frame it that way, suddenly, restricting rare earths exports isn't just about trade, it's defending China against the West. It gives people someone external to blame instead of focusing on the domestic issues. It rallies that sense of nationalism, creates unity against an outside threat. It pushes the idea that the party is still firmly in control of China's destiny. Even though these tactics may backfire, it serves Xi Jinping's immediate political needs to buy time and retain control over everything. But here's the trap that China's stepping into because of their obsession with control. Scholars call it the control security trap. Anxiety from domestic issues lead to tighter control. More control prevents the flexible reforms that the economy needs. So the government shows more strength abroad through more aggressive coercion, which backfires as we saw countries and companies are diversifying away from China, making the economic situation even worse as there's less investment, trade, and jobs, which again validates the original fear that the world is against us, which justifies even more control. So yeah, it's a self-defeating cycle. And each time it repeats, the situation gets worse, not better. Just look at the evidence of the likes of Japan, South Korea, and Australia. They have learned not to trust China. And look, right now, China is actually doing okay in the trade war. They've diversified their exports. When sales to the US dropped, they ramped up shipments to the likes of Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa. But it doesn't change the fact that as China weaponizes its economy and trade, they're pushing the world to move away from them. And when trust is gone, as well as supply chains, they don't return. Or in another country where China is employing aggressive tactics against is the Philippines, and it might be their biggest mistake yet. I made a full video here breaking down why the Philippines has become the biggest obstacle to China's geopolitical ambitions, so check it out right here.